Good morning, everyone, to the United States. It is my great pleasure to open this discussion today. My name is Dominika Hajdu. I'm a research fellow in the Democracy and Resilience program in GLOBSEC. And this discussion is called Democratic Vulnerabilities, How to Rebuild the Trust. It is connected to the launch of our new report, which link you can already see in the chat here or on our website, on our social media. And this discussion will revolve around this report, but also about democracy, about loss of trust, and what shall we do with that. And it is my great pleasure to welcome distinguished speakers, Ms. Miriam Lexman, who is a member of the European Parliament from the currently in the EPP group. Welcome. Then Christopher Walker, who is the Vice President for Studies and Analysis from the National Endowment for Democracy, thanks to whom we also are able to launch this wonderful report. So thank you and welcome. And then Katarina Klingova, who is my colleague and a research fellow in Democracy and Resilience program. So welcome, Katarina. Okay, let me then start with sharing the presentation first. Just a couple of practical points, please. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the Q&A section, and I will hand over the word to my colleague Katarina.
Thank you very much, Dominika. Thank you very much, Miriam and Chris, for joining us. My name is Katarina Klingova, and with Dominika, we would like to present you very shortly our latest report, Voices of Central and Eastern Europe. We've conducted polling and research in 10 European countries. In the right corner, you can see all the countries involved. The polling was conducted in March, and it's a representative sample of at least 1,000 representatives in each countries. The report itself is divided into 3 topics: democracy and governance, media, and believing conspiracy and disinformation narratives. Yeah, we're going to present it shortly.
Sorry, I was muted. The reason why we chose these 3 topics is that they're currently very much at the center of attention. There is a long-term talk about democracy and about the face of democracy we're going to have in the near future, as well as about the freedom and trust in media, and about the impact of conspiracy theories and disinformation on the society. So regarding the democracy and governance, there are a few key findings that we identified when analyzing the data. First of all, it is that the support and satisfaction with democracy and governance system is not straightforward in the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, everywhere except for Austria. But at the same time, the quality of democracy does play a role. We found out that in those countries which score quite high in general democracy indexes, for example, developed by Freedom House or by the Economist Intelligence Unit, in those countries, respondents are also quite satisfied with how democracy works in their own country. And also 91% of those who are satisfied with how democracy works in their country are happy with their life or satisfied with their life. To show you a glimpse of the data, as you can see on this graph, those most satisfied, or those who would be most supportive of liberal democracy are in Austria, and then actually in Hungary and Poland. And those who would actually even choose an autocratic leader or a strong leader with autocratic tendencies are found in Bulgaria and to a lesser extent in Latvia. Secondly, we have developed an index which looks at satisfaction with the current governance system. meaning that we combined 11 different questions, and by looking at how they correlate with each other, we identified a factor of satisfaction with the governance system and found out that actually, again, Austrians are the most satisfied with their current governance system, and actually the rest of the countries is somewhere in the middle. So neither satisfied nor very much dissatisfied with the system. This scale you can imagine as if the country scored 100%, the respondents would be 100% satisfied with the system, and minus 100 would be completely dissatisfied with the system. What kind of questions were included into this index? This is especially trust in the institutions. The highest degrees of distrust were expressed towards political parties. And the strongest degrees of trust were expressed towards security forces, especially. Then feeling of inclusion, so whether people feel that their voice counts in their country, and then satisfaction with democracy. One of the most important findings that we identified in this report is that, as I already mentioned, the great majority of those who are satisfied with democracy are also satisfied with their life. But at the same time, there is a large discrepancy between those who are satisfied with democracy, those are the blue circles that you can see at the bottom, and those who are dissatisfied with their life, which we interpret as a possibly dangerous finding, because whereas it suggests that those that satisfaction with the system might actually contribute to satisfaction with life, it's not the other way around. So people can be satisfied with their life, even if they're not satisfied with the system, because there might be other factors and other contributors to their life satisfaction. I'll now hand over the word to Katarina.
Another finding that we found is that there is a strong recognition among Central and Eastern Europeans that that there is a strong oligarchic influence and inequality. And this influence is especially visible when it comes to the work of the government and political parties. Next slide, please. We see that people think that people that have political contact and have money are much more visible, and their needs are much more heard and taken into consideration by the government and by the political parties. We see that, on average, it's 70%. Another thing that we see is the power and influence of these oligarchs and financial groups. We see that basically, in Slovakia, that's the most dominant perception, but, Austria usually is an outlier, but in this variable, we see that they follow the rule, and 84% of Austrians think similarly. On the other hand, in Hungary, it is only 39% that think that oligarchs and other financial groups have a strong control over government. We can contemplate why that is, yeah. Let's go to the other slide, please. This influence of oligarch and financial groups is also visible on media. Again, we can divide it between the governmental and oligarchic. 64% of Hungarians think that government has a huge impact and influences the work of media. On the other hand of spectrum is Slovakia, where only 24% of respondents think similarly. The oligarchic influence on media is very much present also in Austria, where 57% of respondents think so. Next slide, please. So we see that another finding that we find that there is that respondents are more inclined to give up their freedoms and benefits for better security or better protection of traditional values. Next slide. And this is most visible, especially in Slovakia. Well, on average, 64, and I couldn't see the figure, where on average, over 60% of Slovaks would give up their security, would give up their rights and freedoms for better security or financial stability. In this case, Slovakia is an outlier, but similar tendencies are widespread also in region, especially in Bulgaria, also in Czechia, which was for us a bit surprising. Next slide. Another topic that we focused on was conspiracy and misinformation. We see that conspiracy theories and misinformation have a huge impact how people eventually trust public institutions. And we found out that the people who believe in conspiracy theories and misinformation, they're actually more likely to trade their freedoms and rights for other benefits. They prefer also more autocratic leader over liberal democracy. These people are also more likely to distrust media. And there's a huge distrust in media. 7 out of 10 people do not trust media in Central and Eastern Europe. These people who believe conspiracy theories are also very much dissatisfied with how the democratic institutions and democracy works in their country. And they're in general also very much dissatisfied with their own life and its standings. So I think these are the findings that we found out, the key findings of our research. And Dominika, you can lead the debate.
Thank you very much, Katarina, for your reflections and for your comments. I would now like to ask our distinguished speakers to intervene and reflect on these findings. And I would like to start with Miriam. Could you tell us what you found most interesting or most striking in those findings, and why do you think that's important? Excuse me, you're still muted. Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you very much. When I see this kind of data, I am always thinking how practically difficult it is to read what we should read and not to see in the numbers what we want to see. And I think that's the kind of most hard part when someone is analyzing data. And I remember this from the International Republican Institute, where we did polling very regularly, also thanks to the National Endowment for Democracy. And what I learned, and this is what I would like to share as well, is while analyzing data, is that we first of all have to look into the trends, and we also have to look from a very different perspectives when we see data. And for example, what is interesting for me is that on one hand, when we see that in Hungary, we have a very high support for liberal democracy and very low support for a strong leader, where I would say it's the opposite in Slovakia. We have relatively low support, or in compared to Hungary. In Hungary, we have 81% of the people support the liberal democracy and only 12% are supporting a strong leader. Rather in Slovakia, we have 49% of people who support liberal democracy and 38% support a strong leader. But then when we saw the charter, and now I forgot the figures from Poland, but it was, I think, in Poland, the numbers were similar to Hungary. But when we have the charter, when you were explaining the satisfaction with the government system, where you combine a couple of other aspects, we ended up with Hungary being practically the best example, because it was only -2, Slovakia was -11, and Poland was -18, which to me really shows that it's very, very difficult to see what is exactly happening with this data. But maybe when I look at the data as such, and when I see the kind of ranking of the countries being jumping up and down, practically, that one charter shows that, yes, I mean, maybe the democratic system or freedom of media in this particular country is better than this one, but then we see another picture where it's the other way around. And obviously, I mean, this debate is not going to have space to go really into every single data piece to analyze it. But what I want to maybe share with the audience is that what I believe is absolutely vital is to study the data, and that's why it's great that the National Endowment for Democracy is, I would say, one of the unique supporter of regular polling in Europe or Central Eastern Europe, because practically what shows, or what is very important information, is that when we see the trends, and this is probably the most important thing. On the other hand, I see what is interesting to me is that when we look at this data, I don't think that they completely match with when you had the ranking of Freedom House and what was the other
Intelligence Unit?
The Economist Intelligence Unit?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So we see also discrepancies there, or we also see the discrepancies between the recent data coming from this GLOBSEC research and the two lists. And maybe kind of an idea what I believe that we haven't been studying so far, but I know that it's not that easy to look into it, is that we need to combine the behavior of people when exposed to certain information. And this is something what I've been thinking recently, which hasn't been done yet. But I think that's very important, that we are not only looking at the freedom of media, how people see different media, but what I think would be very interesting to look into it, that what kind of behavior is caused by certain pieces of information. Because there we could see even clearer the link between the outlets and the information and the actual thinking of or behavior of the people, or their relationship into, with the state, with the governments, or their ideas. And I think this is mainly possible also in the focus groups, because for this kind of research, it's very important to talk to concrete people and see their kind of whole story, you know, what they read, how they receive information. So this is maybe one piece of kind of thought which is in my head when I saw this data. And another idea I would like to bring up, or another thought, is that when I was looking at this data, actually, it was practically recently in the European Parliament, we had the very heated debates about the status of democracy in Poland and Hungary because of the Hungarian state of emergency and the legal consequences after that, and also the situation with the Polish elections. And I was kind of thinking when I look at this data, because actually Poland and Hungary do not look, from certain point of view, as the black sheep of this group of countries, or not necessarily in all the charts. And I think that one of the kind of outcome, at least to me, is that we have to have a much broader and in-depth approach to how we see the different trends in the different countries, because sometimes our reaction when we see a negative trend, or we potentially expect a negative outcome, leads us into maybe, I would say, differentiation among the different countries, which is probably not based on data or accurate data. And then the situation, by mistakes which roll out of that, could the situation even worsen. And I will maybe even finish with the thing which is so explicit to me, at least, is that when we were debating the situation in Hungary and Poland during these pandemics, we were not debating the situation in Czech Republic, where, for example, we then learned that the government has ruled without any legal basis for their decisions. We also see that in Slovakia, the compulsory the compulsory quarantine is now being questioned. So there are lots of legal issues which are related to a similar situation in many states. And maybe the problem sometimes is that we have a kind of preset of how we see the different countries. And this is how we read the data. This is how we see the different developments in the countries, individual countries. And I think if we want to be a genuine and if we want to have a kind of really, I would say, more scientific approach and to understand really more in depth the numbers we see in front of us, we have to really kind of vanish the past, vanish some of the experience and try to really read the trends, what they tell us, and then maybe kind of shape the reaction accordingly. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Miriam. I definitely agree with you that also this report sheds some light on some perhaps trends that we haven't explored yet. And definitely one of the findings that we have from this is to focus more on how people actually receive and understand democracy, because when they choose between liberal democracy and autocratic leader, it might be that they would prefer still a democracy, but with some maybe liberal tendencies and etc. So there's definitely need for deeper and deeper look into that. I would now like to give pass my word to Chris Walker. Chris, you have been studying democracy for a long time. So I would be very interested in hearing your reflections on how you see this data.
Well, first of all, thank you to you, Dominika, and to Katarina. It's really a pleasure to be here and discuss these findings. I think GLOBSEC's work is so important, the analysis you do, and as Miriam alluded to, having public opinion data is so important because it allows you to have a better diagnosis of what's happening on the ground. And without that, it's very difficult to formulate responses. It's also a particular pleasure to be on the panel with Miriam and great to see her. I think what I would do at the outset is first note that many of the issues that have come up in this data, we see in other parts of the world as well. And so I think at some level, the features of the challenges that have emerged, while they may have certain characteristics in Central and Eastern Europe, they're also evident in other parts of the world. And among these, I think, are a feeling in some segments of the population of an inability to influence political choices, the feeling of powerlessness that you allude to, elements of dissatisfaction with the quality of democracy. This is seen throughout the region, but of course in other places as well. And then, at least in part as a result of those sorts of factors, eroding trust in institutions. And of course, if that runs too deep, it creates even larger knock-on effects, which are highly problematic. So I think it's important to put this in context, that this is not simply a Central and Eastern European challenge. It's actually a larger challenge that many societies are facing at the moment. And I also would stress the notion that many of these features are interrelated and interact with each other, and hence create more complicated knock-on effects for dealing with them. I think Miriam Lexman very properly alluded to the importance of trends. And so I thought what I would do in the context of the points of emphasis in this particular study is just talk about a few trends that I think are important going back, say, a dozen years ago or so. It might be a little bit longer than that, but let's use a dozen years as a point of reference. And if we're talking about democracy and governance and media and conspiracy theories, I think something we need to keep in mind, which is a global problem, but one that I think has particular resonance in the countries that were examined in this study, are the erosion of the capacity of independent media that's been ongoing for quite some time, but really accelerated with the financial crisis in 2008. And so, whether you're talking about really media in so many open societies, but very much the case in Central Europe, parts of the Baltic states that just were hit incredibly hard, countries like Latvia, for example, who really experienced the financial crisis in a profound and negative way, and their media took a very significant hit, the independent media there. This, of course, was happening right around the time social media was taking off and becoming not only a force in its own right, but arguably becoming the dominant source, at least starting to become the dominant source for where people get their news and information. And if anything, over the last decade, that's only accelerated. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and the like have increasingly become the principal channels for people to get news and information compared with traditional media. And then finally, over the course of that period of time, the ability of malign actors to participate in the media space, while not the principal challenge democracies are facing, is clearly one that was not nearly as developed a decade ago. And so in essence, you've had several interrelated factors that have emerged and developed over time, which I think are quite relevant to the snapshot that was taken in the findings you have. And so I think if we look at, for example, the challenges that have emerged from the fusion of political, commercial, and media power, which again is not simply an issue arising in Central and Eastern Europe. It's an issue that's arisen in a lot of settings. Sometimes it's only governmental or oligarchic, but you have examples in the countries we're discussing and farther afield where it's actually powerful forces that have commercial, political, and media power all at once. And that creates some, I think, special challenges, both in terms of perception, and that comes through, broadly speaking, in the data, that people, if it's not the case in fact, people perceive that they're not getting a fair shake because privileged interests or certain elites are rigging the rules. And I think that that's a real challenge. And I would conclude by saying that, you know, in the information domain and how people understand the world, the challenges are quite evident, and you've alluded to some of them in the findings. But I think when we talk about corruption and the way societies perceive this, the way ordinary people perceive this, I think there have been some particular challenges in the countries, many of the countries that were examined in your study, relating to the ability of the system to hold powerful actors to account. And so the judicial sector, while they may take cases up, they don't necessarily bring them to justice, say when powerful figures are engaged in corrupt practices. And I think to the extent that isn't seen through, ordinary people can become cynical and feel as though the system is not actually addressing corruption. And I think that's a challenge. And those things can also become mutually reinforcing to the extent it's not seen that the system is addressing things in a fair way with equity. People will say, well, maybe the system isn't really delivering for me. And I think over time, if those issues aren't addressed in a meaningful way, they can start to build momentum. And we may be seeing evidence of that, at least in part, in some of the aspects of your findings. So with that, I think I'll conclude. I won't go on much farther. I'm happy to add to it during the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you both to your remarks. You have highlighted large challenges, I believe, which the entire society is facing and which need to be actually addressed probably on the whole of society level, because you've mentioned, you know, economic crisis, you mentioned the rise of social media, and also the space for malign actors to intrude and actually shape the debate and shape the discussions. And while there are so many actors and so many factors who are contributing to actually the weakening of democracy and to the weakening of the trust in the system, I found it sometimes very difficult to grasp the solutions, the positive part of what we can do in this respect. So I would actually like to turn the second half of the discussion to a more positive part and give some hope to all of us and to the attendees and later on to those who will be listening to us on the live stream. Miriam, you have been working for some time now in the European Parliament. Obviously, the European Union's competences are limited in some respect, but there are some calls for a stronger engagement, especially in the communications aspect in the European Union, or in perhaps a stronger naming and shaming of the European Union, or punishment of those who are not following the democratic rules or the EU law. What do you think the EU could do to improve this disillusionment or the feeling of powerlessness of its citizens?
Thank you very much. I would just mention two things which came to my mind when Chris was speaking. Because you mentioned cynicism and kind of the cynicism and disillusion in the society. And I was actually thinking that one aspect of polling, which is very difficult at the moment, is that people are also having a cynic approach to the polling as such. They don't want someone else to know their opinions, and because they know that it can be, people can read, I think before they thought like this is into my profit, but now they think this is into somebody's profit to do something with the society. So we are facing another aspect, a challenge when doing polling, is that if the people are really genuine in their answer, or they try to read through where we are aiming with the polling and try to kind of influence our work the way they believe it's the most efficient, which kind of supports their stand. In terms of the solutions, I'll share an experience. I will not tell where it was and who were parts of this experience, but I have been in an academic debate about the kind of state of values in the European Union. If the European Union adheres to its values, or we have changed our values, or what is the status quo of values, or if we know what values are those values which actually convene the European Union together. And it was interesting that somehow the debate ran into the discussion about Hungary and Poland, as most of the debates concerning values or democracy actually do in Europe. And when I brought up an example which happened during these pandemics, when I said that because we did not like that the fact that if Hungary declares a state of emergency, then Orban can rule by decrees, we were suggesting that this is not a good solution, that Hungary should not declare a state of emergency. But because we, as the European Union, we thought that it would be better for Poland and Polish people to postpone the elections, we were actually saying that Poland should declare a state of emergency because we thought this is better for the people. And my question was that who are we to decide and to make this decision that this country should act this way because we believe it's better and it's more coherent to the values of democracy and rule of law and human rights, and this country should act differently. And interestingly, the debate has completely turned around, where even those people who before were very critical of Hungary and Poland started to kind of understand, or maybe kind of change their rhetoric, saying like, yes, we probably should discuss, first of all, again, what is the role of the European Union and what are the values we actually are praising, and how do we understand the values? Because, and my answer, what to do with this as an answer of the European Union to these pollings, is to, first of all, have a genuine debate how we understand freedom, democracy, how we understand subsidiarity, where the competencies of the European Union ends. And here I would say that during the pandemics, or yes, like as soon as Orban has declared the state of emergency, there was an opinion poll done by the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, I believe. Or no, it was ordered by the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. I don't remember the polling agency which did it, which actually revealed that people who did not vote for Fidesz were supporting the state of emergency because they believe it's done for their security, that in this exact moment we support and we stand behind our prime minister because it has to be one entity, one kind of leadership. We cannot have disputes between now opposition and the coalition because that will not lead to quick decisions which need to be done in order to protect our health. And by criticizing the decision of the government and the parliament, actually, because it was a parliament, we were actually pushing the people of Hungary against the European Union because they believed that the most important for the Union was actually to criticize their prime minister and not their own health. And so if I'm asked what is the solution, is to go step back and not to talk about if the European should have a greater competencies to judge somebody's democracy or rule of law, or one of the member states' democracy and rule of law. But I think the first step here is we should go back and discuss the status quo, our own values, where we agree, where we disagree, how far, for example, or what differences in the different reading of certain values we accept, because we understand that this is the kind of, I don't know, this is the scale. The countries have joined the European Union with understanding that this particular, like, for example, human dignity could be understood as a pro-life, but also pro-abortion. Then when we open up the discussion about this, only then I think we should discuss, and also about the subsidiarity principle, exactly not redefine, but kind of try to understand what is in the treaty and what actually it means, where the competencies of the European Union start and when they end. And only after that, we can discuss what discussion we should have, or what competencies the European Union has in order to judge the rule of law and democracy in the member states. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's definitely a provoking thought, and it's definitely worth discussing further, because I mean, as you mentioned, or also as Chris mentioned, the world is constantly changing, right? And we have to, like, the world should adapt to changing circumstances. And apparently, as the societies are moving forward, we should actually eventually adapt to the rules of the game and discuss them, because the rules of the game also need to change depending on the changing circumstances. So thank you for that, definitely. I would like to now turn to Katerina. You have been studying conspiracy theories and disinformation for many years. The findings, among other things, show that also Slovakia, Bulgaria are the most conspiracy prone. You've also been engaged in various campaigns, various awareness raising activities. Is there something that you would like to suggest we should do, especially in those countries where there is a higher belief in conspiracy theories and disinformation? Can we get some recommendations from you, please?
Sure, thank you. Maybe I will do a bit of a short follow-up on Miriam, because I completely understand, and that's part of the solution eventually. I completely understand and agree with that. We need to start discussing about the European values and what is being understood within each member states. What do these people understand are European values? Because there are huge discrepancies, and these discrepancies among the EU member states are being utilized by our adversaries, you know. So we need to have this open debate, and our research shows when it comes to election monitoring, but also these pollings, that people feel disentangled. They do not feel that they are part of the decision-making processes, and there's a huge gap between the politicians or public institutions and their needs and their thoughts. So we need to, we need to diminish this gap, and we need to involve people, and we need to foster civic education and public participation from early years on, among the children. And then we need to create measures and policies that would enable easier participation in public decisions when it comes to all generations, whether young or elderly. I would like to also follow up on Miriam, what you said when it comes to public opinion polls, you know, people having a cynical approach to them. When we did election monitoring, we saw that there is a lot of disinformation being spread about public opinion polls and polling agencies that are doing the polling themselves. So this is you know, this cynical approach of the respondents is one part, but then there's a whole disinformation about how the polling is being set and fitting particular political leaders, how the PR agencies are basically patsies and puppets of foreign agents, and you know, so we need to talk about these things, and we need to talk about how the democratic processes are functioning. That's part of the solution, that we need better strategic communication being conducted by all public, by every single public actor, by public institutions, because this is something that we see is lacking. A lot of public servants do not realize that they need to actively communicate their job and their policies in a very, very understandable way to the public, so that people feel, you know, involved and they understand what is being done and implemented in their country. And another, you know, solution is also we need to talk about our history and our historical grievances, because when we look at the conspiracies that we polled, we see that a lot of them are based on historical grievances and on the fact that we do not communicate about our history, whether it was good or bad. I mean, you know, people forget things, and new generations are being born, and our polling shows that there is about 20 to 30% of population that do not know, you know, what kind of stance they should have towards conspiracy or disinformation theories. And this, you know, this inability to say whether something is wrong or right, or this inability to understand the historical situation concepts are being utilized by mainline actors, whether domestic or foreign. So we need to talk about our history and explain stuff to ordinary people and have public discussions.
Thank you, Katerina, very much. So far, it looks like the grow of the work needs to be done within communication, whether it's, you know, rediscussing the rules of the game, or whether it's the involvement of the government and other trusted authorities in the communication of some values and communication, or rediscussing of what the system means, what our life in the system means. Chris, I would like to turn back to you again. You mentioned that the feeling of powerlessness and the quality of the feeling that the democracy is not the best system, or some disillusionment with the quality of democracy is not unique to CEE. But at the same time, Austria is completely different in some questions when it comes to, for example, trust in public institutions, or when it comes to satisfaction with the system. What do you think that, where's the difference? Is it still the fact that the rest of the democracies are quite young because they were part of these bloc within the Cold War, or, you know, where is this division? What should we do differently in the CEE to increase this trust and this divide?
So I think giving a definitive answer on why the distinction is so different with that one country is very difficult to do. It could well be that the roots of certain institutions have grown far deeper, and hence the perception of the population is different. It could be that the relative level of prosperity there is such that people have that perception. But I think what I would emphasize in this challenge that so many countries are facing in the erosion of trust is that I don't think it's possible to ascribe the challenge to any single factor. I don't think it's monocausal. And Dominica, I think when you first posed the question, you made the observation that this is very complicated, and I would agree with that. And I think that's part of the challenge, that there are a host of factors that certainly are feeding into the erosion of trust and the cynicism in many respects. I think being in a position to separate those out enough so that they can be dealt with is really important, because one of the things that's emerged in the recent past is that these incredibly important discussions about the effect of social media on the ability to have coherent public discussions and sort out complex public policy issues has been wrapped into other issues concerning technical aspects of technological governance and things of this sort, and many other issues related to it. And I think one of the things that the brilliant Edward Lucas has argued, who knows the region so well, is that we're probably at a point where we need to think about how to disaggregate and simplify some of the challenges we've identified and start to deal with them at a slightly lower level, and not get consumed with dealing with a host of wickedly complex issues that are interlinked, that when they're dealt with at a very high level, really don't lend themselves to easy solutions. And I alluded to some of those with respect to, for example, finding more effective ways to support independent media that's oriented towards public policy issues on the one hand, while also dealing with the corrosive swirl that has emerged in much of the social media world for people who consume news and information from those quarters. They're of course related, but they also have certain distinctions. And I think when those are conflated and you try to solve them as one big jumble, it becomes very difficult. And to the extent we're not able to make some headway on these things, and to the extent these kinds of issues are driving distrust or stimulating cynicism, that's a real problem. And so I think it's important both at the level of improving democratic governance and democratic responsiveness, democratic accountability on the one hand, but also improving democratic resilience in the face of external challenges. These things, in my view, are not unrelated. They actually have to be dealt with simultaneously. And so there may be some ways to identify certain problems that ordinary citizens are able to focus on and address on the one hand, but recognizing that this will be the only way we make meaningful headway is if the response is multidimensional, because the problem is multidimensional.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Definitely. When we've also been discussing this issue with our partners from different countries, they have also reflected on the fact that the meaning of or the engagement of the public is very important. And often in many CE countries, the civic engagement and the public engagement is not very strong, and people still cannot fully grasp what democracy really means, what it means, what are my rights, what are my what I can actually do to participate in the system. We've had this one discussion with Transparency International, and they were saying that this is very much lacking in some communities. I would like to open floor now to our attendees, and I encourage everyone to post questions. First one is coming from actually my colleague Miroslava, who is, I'll just read it out. First of all, thanks for this very lively discussion and an interesting report. And her question is, of course, a rediscussion of what democracy represents and where the competencies of EU begin and end is always good. However, as UNIVO 27, we're very diverse, and it is unlikely that the result will be a single agreement on these very complex issues. And she's asking, would broadening of European values and principles to those which are currently criticized not lead to dangerous relativization of what it means to be a democratic union? I believe this is a question primarily to Miriam. Would you be willing to answer this?
Thank you very much. I don't think the discussion should be who has what kind of opinion about what our values are, because I don't think values is something which is based on a democratic decision. I think the discussion should be not like who is for understanding of this value that way or that way. I think the discussion should go back to the values which really brought the European Union together, and reading the treaties the way how they were meant and how they were written. And I think that's the very important thing, that we understand not what we would like to understand, or not what we would like to be changed in the treaties, but we would understand what were the core values, what brought the people of the European Union, or today's European Union, together. And I think that's possible because, as I said, it's not something what we understand that first of all, I don't think that the values can be understood in a way that they evolve, that what they meant then should mean something different now because we are in the 21st century. And we hear this argument very often. I think that the values were enshrined in the treaties and they meant something. And when we have to dig into their original meaning, and I used the one example of abortion or whatever, being pro-life or against life, or whatever, pro-abortion or against abortion, where today we see many people saying, like, in the European Union, we cannot accept countries which are not allowing abortion because this is not 21st century. But when countries were let into the European Union and they did have abortion ban, and that time it was okay, it meant that the understanding of human dignity allowed already then that the countries should be able to rule, and also the understanding of the subsidiarity principle, that the countries should rule on these issues by themselves. And I think these are kind of the exact examples we can bring when we will come back to the values and we will try to understand how they were meant and with what kind of understanding the different countries joined. Because that's also very important, that we will not judge the countries how they understand the values now, or how somebody understands the values and if the others reflect it, but we should go back to the basis. And I would also, if I may, just one sentence to what Chris Walker has mentioned about the civil society and the kind of that we have to look into what we actually offer to the individual people and the kind of the cleavages in the society, or maybe add Lucas' quotation that we have to probably simplify things and see what we do deliver to people and what we don't, and maybe what they're expecting from democracy and if it's delivered. And there was one opinion poll we did in IRI a few years back, when we actually realized that the Slovak regions where the support to the far right is the highest and openness to disinformation according different questions where we realize was the highest, were the most poor regions in Slovakia, where the people express complete dissatisfaction with the healthcare system, with the system of, I don't know, the employment possibilities. So these two things, kind of very simple bread-related things, are very much related to democracy. And I think we have to have this always in mind, because this will help us, what Ed Lucas nicely suggested, to kind of go back to the basis that democracy has to deliver. Otherwise, there is no way we can gain support for democracy among the populations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Katerina, would you like to react to this?
Yes. I completely understand what Chris and Miriam, that disinformation and conspiracy theories are basically battles for hearts and minds. So we do really need to simplify and deliver, social securities to people. But I would like to, follow up on Miriam. When we did our polling on this conspiracy theories, Slovakia was not only, and it's not only the most conspiracy prone, but when we dig into the data, we saw that it is not the people that, had the primary education that believe in conspiracy theories, but it were the university educated people in Slovakia, and predominantly the Bratislava region, which is the most economically developed region in Slovakia, that concentrated this belief in conspiracy theories and disinformation. So, maybe it was a different polling, maybe it was a different wording of the question itself, but it shows that, yes, we need to take care of people, but conspiracy theories and disinformations are not being utilized and spread by people who live in poor regions. But this is a whole of society problem, and we need the whole of society and whole of government policies to tackle them. And it's not just people who have low education accomplished, but it's the people with university degrees, with PhDs that believe there's disinformation. And, when we just look how many conspiracy theories are being spread during the COVID pandemic, whether it's whether those are about the vaccines or, 5Gs, we need to talk about these things, and we need to have discussions, and we need to simplify the messages, simplify the explanation so that everybody understands them.
Thank you very much, Katarina. I would invite also Chris to react to these before we conclude.
So I agree with Miriam that it's so important to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to enjoy and share prosperity and not be left out. I think this is clearly one of the drivers of dissatisfaction across a whole range of democracies, both within the Central and Eastern European region and beyond it. But I also think we need to, in addition to that, make sure that at a time when democracy is hitting some serious rough spots and is being challenged on a number of levels, both from within and from external malign actors, that we're able to keep in mind the inherent and intrinsic values that come with democratically accountable, transparent, responsive societies that respect individual rights. And I think that's something we can't lose sight of as we get into a period where cynicism may be increasing and where the challenges have grown more acute. So I think I just finished with that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the speakers for taking your precious time to discuss this with us. I think there have been a lot of very interesting and thought-provoking ideas. Maybe just to quickly summarize, you've mentioned that we should come back, take a step back, and restart a discussion about the core values of not only in the European Union but probably in the whole transatlantic area, the core values that our cooperation is based upon, so that we can actually continue cooperating. Because I still believe that we can still be a cooperative bloc with one voice. Then secondly, in terms of increasing the trust, we need to push for re-engagement and talk to citizens and simplify the messages. When there is not such a strong support from the public sector, media should play a strong role, and civil society as well. And also, you've given us quite a lot of thought into further research, into looking further into what democracy means for people, what values mean for people. Also, whether we're not, as Miriam mentioned whether we're not being manipulated ourselves by the citizens responding. And we will definitely conduct further qualitative research to see what democracy means, what people actually in the region think, because I believe that this is a very important input into discussion, to hear actually what people think and how people see the system that they eventually create at the end. So thank you very much for your reflections. It was a real pleasure to see you and talk to you, and I really hope that I will get a chance to see and speak to you soon. And thanks for all the attendees too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dominika. Thank you, Katarina. Thank you, Chris.
See you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.